Welcome, one and all, to episode 6 of Bodied, the Cloud9 Fancast. Today we'll be talking about C9's awesome 3-1 victory over Envy NALCS semifinals. And as always, we'll close out with C9's other esports and our favorite moment of the week. I'm Havokpus, accompanied by a new face to the C9 Fancast, Headwires. How's it going?
What's going on? The faceless face.
Nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
So, the first order of business, Cloud9 versus Envy. It was a pretty good week for us, wouldn't you say?
Pretty good. Would have liked for it to be 3-0.
Yeah, I think it's with these kind of games, it's all right to kind of drop a game just because you have a little bit of leeway and it also lets you know how the team's playing. But I think the one caveat is you have to win the game after that just so you can stay even with them. But they did do that, so I guess it all kind of comes out square.
Yeah, so diving right into it, is there anything you want to start off talking about this whole this quarterfinal matchup?
Well, I think going into this, we should probably look at kind of what the narratives are for these two teams going into this match. So Cloud9, 3rd seed versus Envy, the 6th seed. Envy was really looking to prove themselves coming into this match. They had started off this season really well with a 4-0 victory streak, but then started losing, and people started getting really unsure about them as a team. Some were saying that Apex should have had their spot instead. And it was looking like they were really just, kind of not supposed to be there. On the other hand, Cloud9 was kind of looking to prove themselves in their own way, but they were mostly just needing to show that, yes, they are a 3rd place team. They're going to play like a 3rd place team. And they need to beat this and go to the semifinals to show that they are improving.
Yeah, the way that I would describe Envy is there's always a team like them every split where when every other team is sort of like trying to get their shit together, they pick up a couple wins when they have like an easy schedule in the beginning. But after that 4-0, Envy, like, they didn't really recover, Like, they just looked straight up bad. And as you said, I'm one of the people who I think that Apex would have been a more difficult series, and people are probably going to say that Cloud9's fortunate they got an easier matchup, but I would say that I kind of wanted a more difficult matchup. That way, if there were any problems, the team could identify them and then fix them before playing Immortals.
I agree. Apex is certainly a stronger team. They had, I think, a much stronger roster. They play around Ray a lot, who is a really good top laner. And they seem to be like one of those stronger, more energetic teams.
Yeah, it's weird how many teams this split played around their top laners, or how many teams their best player just happens to be their top laner. Envy's a team that I think when you talk about them, it's impossible to talk about them without talking about Seraph, because like Huni and Immortals, he is their star player and the one that they try to play around the most. But like halfway through the split, he sort of disappeared. I don't know if that was because they stylistically wanted to play through their mid laner, but it was just really weird. And you could tell that after those first couple series that they had, they just like could not recover.
Yeah, I think that they started to try to play more around Ninja and Lod because the meta was really in a place where, since lane swaps are so prevalent, the side lanes could just farm for forever. So all the pressure was on mid lane, so they were trying to get Ninja and to a lesser extent Lod to be on this big point, and they just really couldn't do that because there are so many other more skilled players in their positions, and it just kind of felt like a lopsided matchup.
Yeah, I don't even think it's really due to the lane swap even, because that's been around even last year in summer when all these teams in Korea and Europe are playing around their top laners. I think it's more that the meta requires that mid lane be, if not the primary source of damage, the focal point because of the mid-season patch.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of lane swaps, this match started on a new patch where they basically eliminated all lane swaps. There was a new mechanic called First Blood Tower Gold, where the first team to kill the first tower gets extra gold. What are your opinions on this mechanic and sort of killing lane swaps in general?
My opinion is that I see the idea of what Riot wanted to do for competitive because a lot of people were complaining, and especially Europeans, that like the game is boring with lane swaps because for the first 15 to 20 minutes it's just people farming and it's really boring to watch, which as a spectator I agree with, but if you actually look at what they've done with this change, because it's not just that they added the first blood gold to the tower, which is it's a ridiculous amount of gold, number one, but the other thing they did was they reduced the damage that towers take early on, I believe. So it would have been more difficult to actually take that first tower. But I think overall this is an unhealthy change because I think it's going to affect the meta in ways that Riot didn't actually understand it would. I feel like the game is so snowbally now that if once you get to like that high enough of a level, the team that gets the first tower gold is just gonna blow open the game. It won't even be like a competition.
Yeah, the if you remember from I think games 1 and I think 2 or 3 with the First Blood Tower Gold, they would give it all to Sneaky, and he would get a whopping 650 gold just off killing a tower. And that's a lot just for taking down one objective.
Yeah, so imagine that in like if someone like Hooney or Doublelift gets that gold, like that's like an automatic lead that isn't really like you can't come back from that. You're just instantly down like a core item.
Yeah, that's actually kind of crazy. They were supposed to they planned on putting in the cannon minion changes as well, but they scrapped that idea at the last minute. Do you think that would have counterbalanced some of this snowballing, or would it just be more of an inconvenience?
When I read that for the first time, I just thought like I did not understand it. I couldn't understand why they were trying to do that because it just like makes managing waves so much more complicated than like actually pushing with Baron buffs where if you have a canyon minion wave in one lane, then you can't actually like rotate to another lane and still have a canyon minion wave. I just thought it was like it just seemed like a dumb idea. It's like one of those things where Riot they just like get these ideas up and like, oh, this would be cool, let's try this. But I'm glad they scrapped it the last minute because I thought it was stupid.
Yeah, I suppose it is hard to kind of balance the game when, especially when you're trying to cater to two groups of people, the pro scene and where they just want the most optimized game possible versus the average everyday player who just wants to have fun game mechanics and new interesting strategies they can play around. So it can certainly be hard to kind of dictate where you want the game to go.
Yeah, I think I don't know if you saw, but Thorin and Monte Cristo do Summoning Insight, and they released one today where they talked about this change. And Thorin specifically said that he thinks that historically in esports games like StarCraft and CS:GO, when the developers try to make a change, like oriented towards competitive, it's the wrong thing to do because the developers aren't smart enough to understand how like the gamers would interpret that change and abuse it like to its fullest potential. You know, like when they added in flash mechanics on the summoner spells, I doubt developers when they first did that thought about like flashing over walls or like Lee Sin. No one like a developer would have never thought you could have done like insects with Lee Sin or Azir. So I think the point he was getting at was like you need to balance the game around a general audience, and then the competitive will maximize that on its own. You don't need to specifically gear it towards competitive.
Yeah, I certainly agree. Well, at the risk of getting too off topic, let's jump into the series. So, game one was fairly rocky, I think, if you would agree with me.
I was extremely upset at the end of game one.
It was a very odd game one, but I think the problem with that game one is a couple things. So, Envy had actually a very interesting draft. They pretty much just had a whole team of AoE damage dealers. You had Lysandra, you had Kennen, you had Sivir, you had Gragas, and did they have Braum? I can't remember. But it was essentially all AoE damage, so it was very easy for them to just kind of make this very large zone, and it was really hard to get away. So all they had to do was be annoying as possible and stall up the game, and once they scale up to a certain point, they'll actually start winning fights and then just win.
Yeah, their comp was oriented toward diving the backline and getting Sneaky and Jensen killed, because like Kennen becomes invulnerable and then he can have that huge AoE stun. Same thing with Lysandra, and then once they locked down Sneaky and Jensen, Lod would use Sivir's W, the Ricochet, which would just like crit them and it instantly killed them. Like as soon as you got them get to that like late game team fight stage, like it was extremely difficult for Cian to deal with, and that's why they ended up banning Sivir for the rest of the series.
Yeah. The Critiche is, I think, probably one of the deadliest AD carry weapons in that sort of class, in that arsenal that just, once you get 3 or 4 items, you really open up and can just start killing people, without even trying,
It's so stupid.
really. It's a really weird mechanic, but I will say playing in solo queue, it feels really good to just get like a quadra kill with no skill.
Oh yeah, I mean,
it's great.
Sivir's my favorite AD carry, and it's like
I know, she's so easy to play, and you're the go button. It's so fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I'm trying to think of what champion C9 really has a problem with, and sometimes Lysandra does really give them an issue. I'm not sure if it's the fact that she can just kind of keep people in place, or if it's the frozen tomb that's really hard to counter, or what, but I think over the course of this season, sometimes Lysandra has just really caused the team problems. Not as problems as, say, like Jhin in the past, but certainly enough to kind of, when you see her being picked, you kind of have to worry a little bit.
Well, Lysandra was Envy's most banned champion, like against them, because it could be flexed in mid or top, and Seraph, I think it's one of his like favorite champions, and it's just a pick that they play really well, and I don't think that they weren't prepared to deal with it, because they did end up playing it against it, I think, game 2 again, and they seemed like they just completely shut it down. I don't think Lysandra or Kennen was really the problem, because they played those picks again. It was more just the amount of damage that Sivir was doing. Like, Sivir is extremely potent in pick and ban in all regions because of just how strong that W is.
I certainly agree. Once they ban out Sivir, the game was open wide for them. Game 2, they looked a lot better. They were able to close out that game. Game 3, they just completely steamrolled them. It didn't even look that close. And then game 4, Jensen broke a record.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy.
Is it even like worth talking about the rest of the series? Because like as soon as we got that out of the way, it was just like,
yeah, as soon as
it was the
it's kind of
Cloud9
just kind of, you're kind of just gushing about like, oh, they did this play, and oh, they did this play. So it's kind of hard to really go in objectively.
Yeah, the analyst desk, they didn't even bother having highlights from it, because it was just like literally.
I mean, the whole
stomp after
games
stomp.
2 through 4 is basically a highlight reel of just pick a player on Cloud9, and yep, they're doing great. But another thing I do want to touch on is there was a person, I'm not sure if you noticed, but there was a person hanging out with them who turns out to be their sports psychologist. So I think one of the reasons why they were performing so well lately is that, they have a guy that can really motivate them and get them to put them in the right mindset.
I did see that dude. when they were showing them after the game, and he was just like with them at the picnic table. But it's really hard to say behind the scenes like what support staff is like really doing for the team, because like obviously we've no idea until like an episode of
Yeah,
Genesis comes out
that
and
is
they'll
very true.
like tell us what's going on. But it's clearly a good sign that more and more teams are having sports psychologists, because they clearly have an effect.
Yeah, I watched an interview today. It was the Score was interviewing Sneaky, and he talked about their sports psychologist, and he said he's been working with them for the past 2 weeks. And it, at least to me, it seems like they've improved a bit, at least mentally, because of having him around. Now, I mean, that's just speculation, but I think that can certainly at least have some sort of evidence with how they're playing and the fact that they didn't completely tilt off the face of the earth after losing game one.
Yeah, I'd like to see. I mean, it's good that Cloud9 went from the team that had no support staff to, it seems like with Reaper and Bubba and all the other guys that they have, it seems like they have one of, if not the best support staff. So that's always great to see.
For sure, for sure. Another question I want to ask while we're on the subject of players and coaches, Headwires, is what do you think of Smoothie? Is he now the best support for Cloud9? Is that confirmed after this week of play?
Well, I wrote an article for Split Push specifically talking before they actually picked Smoothie, and I went into detail about the strengths of both of the supports, and I, in my article, said that I think that they should choose Bunny over Smoothie, because I highlighted that the strengths of Smoothie were that he has a wider champion pool, and when you listen to like comms from C9 post game, it seems like Smoothie's more like High, where he's like a dominant voice. He's like calling things out, saying plays that they should do, which seems to be like it's something that they needed. It was like that high quality that they just lacked with Bunny. But I think overall, like on a mechanical level, I think Bunny is still better by a significant margin. It's just the coaches felt that with his shallow champ pool and the fact that he didn't have that high quality, that Smoothie would be a better fit.
Yeah, I think that Smoothie is proving to be a better fit, just in that he's offering a lot of consistency with the team. They're no longer having to switch gears every other game, because now they can go, okay, well, Smoothie's in game 2. We don't have to worry about switching to Bunny mode. We can just focus on what we need to do with Smoothie for game 2. And like you said, the high effect of him being a very dominant voice in the comms, I think also helps them, because he's very proactive. He's always looking to make plays, and he's always very mindful of flashes and ultimates and all this other stuff. So I think he's becoming a real asset to the team just vocally, even though he doesn't have maybe Bunny level mechanics.
Yeah, I think what they sacrificed with Smoothie is the fact that it's pretty clear that their duo lane seems to be weaker without Bunny. Like Bunny was more dominant, especially on Thresh and things like that. But yeah, it's clearly working out for the team so far. Like in weeks 6 and 7, when they went on like that losing streak, people speculated that yeah, maybe they need to just finally focus on one support, because like it seemed as though Meteos like didn't have synergy with either one of them, and that was something that's just like completely unacceptable and they need to change, and it seems like they've changed it.
Yeah, I felt that way as well. They do sacrifice. I mean, Smoothie's not going to be like Bunny, where he's making these sick flash hook plays and
Well, he
all this other
could.
crap. But I think his Thresh was fairly solid. Watching that series, he looked like a great Thresh. His Tom Kench as well was pretty good. He was saving people constantly, and it looked like he was performing at a pretty high level, even though he's probably not at the same mechanical skill level as Bunny.
Yeah, I don't think the difference between them mechanically is like so obvious. It's kind of like minute things that like collectively make one player feel stronger than the other. But like people forget that Smoothie, pretty much like all support mains now who are coming into the LCS, was a Thresh main. So his Thresh is like, it was pretty disgusting. There was like one hook in particular where when they were taking mid turret, I forget what game it was. I think it was game 2 or 3. He like was hugging the wall so that when he threw out the hook, there was like a 0% chance that I think it was either Seraph or Ninja could like dodge the hook. He just like instantly got them. And like Smoothie, it's not like to say he's a bad player. Like he honestly could be built up into a player that's better than Bunny and work much better than Bunny did in Cloud9. It's just like sad to see Bunny go.
Yeah, it is kind of a situation of he was going into this split, he was next in line, so kind of in a line of succession, he does seem to kind of like he deserves that role. But if you're not performing, and there's another guy that's performing maybe a little bit better and a little bit more comfortable with the team, you have to make that tough choice. In sort of another broad note, I am just glad that we're seeing Thresh more, because in my opinion, Thresh is probably the best support just kit wise, because he has a hook, he has a knockback, he has a shield that also saves you, and his ultimate's pretty useful as a zoning tool and stuff. So I'm really just glad to see such a utility-focused champion that's also fairly tanky start to be shown more and more.
Yeah, I think Thresh is one of the best designed champions, not just supports, but just like my last point about the Bunny Smoothie debate, even in like the couple interviews with like Sneaky, Jensen, and Meteos, collectively after they made the final like Smoothie is the starting support, it was like kind of funny to me because like it seemed like they all were like politely trying to say that they wanted Bunny over Smoothie. They were just like, oh, I really don't have any preference. I'm not sure why we did what we did, but the coaches felt like it was the best thing. Like it was just like, to me, I was just like,
sort of
wow,
like
even
the
they wanted
classic
Smoothie, or,
sort of like
Bunny.
the classic athlete football player answer to kind of one of those tough insider questions that you can't really answer.
Yeah.
Well, I think our final point for this series is probably Jensen's record. We can talk about that really quick. He broke the record in Game 4. He got 20 kills, which makes it the most kills in a single game as well as most kills in a playoff game. And it was on his LeBlanc, which is honestly his scariest and probably his best champion.
Yeah, I think he no doubt played well in that particular game, but I think even more so was the fact that the team set him up to break that record, where it was like they were saving all the last hits for him, that way he could eventually just like one-shot people. But I don't know, Jensen seems to me like a player who, to actually become like that monster, needs to be enabled by his team rather than like a Bjergsen who in the past created his own advantages. So it's like really weird to see that. And then like there's one point in Game 4 where Jensen died and he was like literally 50% of their gold, so they just had to like immediately back off because the rest of the team didn't do anything compared to him.
Yeah, he's certainly someone who's a bit more team dependent, and that's not certainly a bad thing. I think that just means that he has to rely a bit on others more than some other mid laners. But that's a tiny difference. I think it's not as big of a deal as it kind of sounds. But yeah, but congratulations to our boy Jensen. Good job. You got the gold.
I think the most surprising thing about that stat was that Scara was the one who previously held it. He hasn't played since like season 4.
And then he actually interviewed him after the game, which I think was pretty funny.
I think that transitions pretty well into the next topic of how do we stack up against Immortals.
Oh, you read my mind. So I think looking at the matchups, it looks like a pretty tough game. Impact and Huni, I would say, are pretty much on the same level. I think Impact is a bit better at just being a solo laner and not really needing a lot of jungle support, while Huni is pretty good on his own, but since he has Reign over, he can really open up and really be a kind of scary thing to deal with.
Ooh, I don't know what games you're watching if you think Huni and Impact are on the same level.
I may have a bit of a player crush on Impact. He's just so cool.
I think that's the one lane where you like it'd be pretty safe. You can't say for sure what's going to happen, but it would be pretty safe to assume that Impact is probably going to lose lane. Like, he's a world class player, and he's got a wicked Gnar and Shen, which has been like banned ever since Shen came back into the meta. But I think what Impact lacks in mechanical ability versus Huni is he's a much better decision maker. Like Huni, his greatest flaw is that he just has extremely poor decision making. You can see that in like his champion picks and a lot of the things that he does. Because Huni, a lot of people won't know this, but he has the most deaths of like any competitive player in any region. He just dies way too often.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. That's pretty crazy. What do you think about the jungle matchup? Reignover versus Meteos. This is really a stylistic battle because they play jungle fairly differently. Meteos kind of plays in a more slower pace and farms a little bit more, so his team can kind of get a bit more gold and maybe assess the situation a little better. While Reignover is at a much faster pace in the early game and really tries to punish people, when they're at their weakest, which is in the early game with little to no items.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I think that this series will come down to the jungle matchup, which jungler has a bigger impact, and that doesn't necessarily mean ganks because the primary role like that junglers must fulfill is to apply pressure. And a lot of people think that that just means they need to gank a lot, but Meteos is a player who his style is to apply pressure not to the lanes but to the other jungler by like invading him, counter ganking him, and like messing up his path and trying to make his life difficult. So I think that it will be extremely interesting to see how that plays out in the series. And I think that the jungle matchup is the key to deciding who's actually going to win the series or not. I think also that Meteos has an advantage in the fact that Reignover plays very similar to how Smithy played in Vulcan in Season 3, where he ganks a lot and tries to take over the game. And Meteos has like played against that enough throughout his career and has enough experience that I think he can overcome it and already has a plan for it.
Yeah, very, very well said. I think one of the matchups that everyone's probably going to be looking at is probably Jensen versus Pobelter. Now, Pobelter has kind of been in the shadow of Jensen and Bjergsen for a little while now. Anytime you hear a talk of like, oh, who's the best mid laner, it's usually between Bjergsen and Jensen, and Pobelter is kind of left out in the cold, kind of. Even though I think he's certainly in the top 3 with them.
I think he should be left out into the cold.
Why do you think that?
Well, I think it's without saying that he certainly is stepped up this split in particular due to the fact that mid laners have to play the role that they're playing currently. But I think that Pobelter looks so good, and it doesn't even really look that good. It's mainly because his team is so fantastic around him. I think if we swapped Pobelter into the role that Jensen has to play, which is Jensen is the person that Cloud9 playthroughs, he is the person who all the gold is funneled into, and he must carry. I think Pobelter you'd see a lot worse play from him.
Yeah, that could be true. I guess my counter argument to that is just that League is kind of a team game. So if you can work well around your team and kind of spread all that out evenly, and if you play really well around everybody else, I think it kind of balances out. But you do have a point that since his role isn't to be like this huge carry like Jensen is, he can kind of slack off and not really have to worry as much about getting a lot of kills or getting a lot of gold and such.
Yeah, I think your point. I think Immortals probably their greatest strength, other than like the skill of their players, is the fact that they play as a team. The style that they play that very well. But I think, as before, where I said Hooney's probably going to win his lane, Jensen is probably going to win his lane, and the opponent, it's more dependent on how hard they'll lose or if they can just like prevent the other laner from taking over the game.
Yeah, Jensen's a really strong laner. I think it's gonna certainly come down to probably who's gonna get camped more, and it's probably gonna be Jensen because Pobelter isn't probably as high priority target on Immortals as some of the other players. But switching over to the bot lane, how do you think the duo lane is going to hold up? Sneaky and Smoothie versus Wild Turtle and Adrian. I think that's going to be a really interesting matchup.
I personally think it's going to be a wash because while there's a lot of hype and like a lot of fans around Sneaky and Turtle, I don't think that those two bot lanes are particularly fantastic, like compared to the rest of the region. I mean, now that Piglet's out of Liquid, the best two bot lanes are probably Afro-Stixay and Double Lift Biofrost, but I feel like neither of those bot lanes are really going to take over the game, and well, which of them do you think would like have an advantage or is the stronger of the two?
That's a good question. I think it kind of has to come down to how team fights work because Turtle and Sneaky both aren't really, at least from what I've seen, aren't really that special in lane. They just kind of wait for ganks. But in team fights, it's very interesting because Wild Turtle really likes to play really flashy, and he'll step forward and he'll be frontline Wild Turtle and start trying to shoot everybody. And he has that backup because Adrian is always playing someone like Soraka or Janna to make sure that he just doesn't die. While Sneaky isn't, certainly the most flashy player in the world, but he's very good with his mechanics and he's very, very consistent. And him and Smoothie seem to be pretty good in terms of making those mid lane plays where they rotate with Ashe and Thresh or whatever, and you have a arrow going down mid and really setting up for a play. So it's kind of going to be interesting to see which one of those styles kind of prevails.
Yeah, I think it again sort of like mid and top. It comes down to the jungle pressure they get. Although I think I'll say, I'll just like come out and say it right now. I think that if there was an advantage to be had in the duo lane, I think it would go in the favor of Cloud9, only because I think that Adrian's champion pool will inhibit him, because I think like the support pool has changed due to the meta shift that we've seen recently, and it's now about sort of lane dominant supports that can affect the rest of the map, like your Tahm Kenches, like your Threshes. It's not about healers like Jen and Soraka anymore, so he might be in a bit of trouble.
Yeah, it's certainly shifting back over to tankier supports, which I personally like just on a personal level. Tank supports are a lot more fun because you can do a lot more stuff with them. So that certainly might impact how they play. Also, I think another thing to keep in mind is that for the pick and bans, Immortals do some crazy things sometimes because I think they're always trying to just get whatever Huni wants and whatever he feels comfortable with. And sometimes that does compromise them. I mean, look at last split in the spring, they picked top lane Lucian a game, and then they went mid Urgot one game. So their pick and bans sometimes kind of get a little crazy because they're maybe a bit overconfident.
Have you seen the I'm a Cutie Pie? He streamed after that happened, and he was like, when I saw that post-game interview with Pobelter, and Pobelter was like, "Oh, I think our read on the meta was wrong." He's like, "That just tilted the shit out of me." It's like, you picked Lucian top. Of course your read on the meta was wrong.
I saw a couple of his tweets, and he was nonplussed. If that's a good way to put it.
It was so funny. But that's a good transition into the often overlooked part of a team, which is like that sixth man, the support staff. So what do you think how the support staff of Immortals matches up against the support staff of Cloud9?
That's a good question. I think Cloud9 maybe has a slight edge. They've gotten a sports psychologist, so maybe that'll help. They also have Reaper, who I think is fairly experienced, not in just coaching, but in the game itself. So he is very knowledgeable about the game, and he's able to draft these really good comps for them. So I think that he's able to really see what the team needs and will pick a comp that the team will most likely be able to execute, while Immortals may not have that luxury.
I think that Cloud9 support staff wise has, while it may not be seen all the time, I think they have a massive advantage over Immortals' support staff, if you could even call it a support staff, because it feels like the players just play like they're like, okay, we need to do like these certain things in the meta, but then after that point they just like do whatever they want, and they think that like they can win games just due to the individual skill of their players. Like when Huni starts playing Riven, Riven's not at all a meta champ, but Huni's so good on it, kind of like Froggen's so good on Anivia that he can just pull that pick out. But like you can't really pull that crap in a best of 5, especially since last split we saw how that turned out against TSM, where they just got absolutely stomped.
Yeah, they're really gonna have to. I think even in the regular season, Huni picked like Tom Kench top against a team, and I think they lost. I can't remember, but it certainly did not look very good.
Yeah, I don't think Immortals will make the same gravity of mistake that they made last split with the Lucian top, but I think like that problem is still there. Like I don't know how much their coach Dylan actually affects the game. It seems like he's just kind of there along for the ride. Whereas Rebird, I think if there's a problem in game, Cloud9 will be able to properly identify and facilitate that problem, because the people that they have just seem more adept at dealing with stuff like that.
Yeah, Reaper certainly seems more like a very authoritative, but respected authoritative figure. That if he sees a problem, he's going to try to fix it, and he's not going to sugarcoat it or anything. While Dylan, maybe might joke around and be like, "Oh, Lucian top, haha, that's really funny. We'll get him in the next one," and then then they don't.
Yeah. So, what do you think as a score line for this series? How do you think it's going to go?
That's a rough one. I've been thinking about this all day, trying to mentally prepare for what predictions I'm going to make. I think it'll probably go 3-1 or 3-2. I'm not sure who it's going to go with. I think it's really up in the air. Both teams are really good, and I think that C9's made a lot of improvements over the split. But I think there's still sort of this big mystery factor over whether they're good enough to beat Immortals in a series.
So you're going 3-2 Immortals?
I suppose so.
Yeah. Okay. Like I said before, I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. It could go either way, and I think it does come down to the jungle matchup, like how though Meteos and Reignover affect the rest of the game. I think is the most deciding factor between the game, because everything else is a known quantity. We know Huni and Jensen are the main carries. It's just how is the team gonna like work around them, and I think that Cloud9, a lot of people seem to be counting them out. They say like 3-1, or maybe like some people are being generous and giving them 3-2, but I actually think that Cloud9 has a very good chance of beating Immortals. So I'm going to go confidently with saying Cloud9 3-2.
All right. Headwires with the bold prediction. We'll certainly have to tune in this week and see who makes the cut. Really quick, just to kind of stay on this topic a tiny bit more. We don't have to go too much in detail, but who do you think is going to win the TSM game, TSM or CLG? What you thinking?
I think it would take not a miracle, but something close to it for CLG to beat TSM.
Maybe 2 miracles?
I mean, like, I watched CLG versus TL. I finished it up this morning and I started watching it last night, all the games, and I thought that it was like really funny because TL were just so bad. They just like looked terrible in like every respect. Ardex seemed to be the only player who. Okay, so like quickly to characterize that whole series, I'll give it to you in like one quick analogy, or not even an analogy, but so the top lane matchup for every single game was Gnar versus Irelia. Darshan played Gnar every game. Lorlo played Irelia, which is like his best champion. It's the champion he's known for every single game. And that's a winning matchup for Irelia. And every single game, Darshan was like ahead in lane. Like he was stronger for a significant portion of the time. And it wasn't due to jungle pressure because they both got an equal amount. And like even a matchup that you're supposed to win, that you're so like you're known for it, you still don't win. That was like the whole series.
Yeah, it was certainly an interesting game. It'll certainly be an interesting match. I think TSM's probably gonna win just because TSM's been so great.
I think
But what?
CLG. Oh, not to interrupt you, but I think CLG. I think they play as a team better than any other team in the LCS, and they're like greater than the sum of their parts. And I think Afromu is like just a world class player in every way. But I think it's probably going to be like 3-1 TSM.
All right, so before we close out, do you wanna give us your favorite moment of the week in esports? It doesn't have to be Cloud9 related. It can be from any other league match or any other esport.
My favorite of the week. Well, since it happened in the week, I don't know how many NA fans actually watch Korea, but I think my favorite moment was KT Rolster finally beating SKT in a playoff best of 5. It was like they finally fulfilled this destiny after they
they fulfilled the prophecy. I saw it. It felt really good.
Yeah, I thought that was a crazy series. Even if you don't like watching Korea, I think you should watch that because that was just an outstanding series.
Yeah, for sure. My favorite moment in esports actually wasn't really a moment at all because it didn't happen. The EU LCS experienced a technical difficulty and postponed the match for 2 hours, and after they couldn't drag it along anymore, they decided to reschedule the match. And it was just so funny seeing everyone on Reddit memeing over this flub up.
Yeah, okay, so I like got on a plane right as that series was starting. Like I was watching it on my phone and then I had to get on a plane. And when I got off the plane, I checked to see like how the series went, and the top thing on Reddit is just like series postponed. I was like, oh, that's got to be a joke, right? There's no way they actually postponed it.
Yeah, they even made a trash talk thread for people to trash talk the production team. It was pretty funny.
That's just like completely unacceptable. And like it's pretty well known that like the production team for EU is like not that great, but that's just like wow.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all the time for today. Thank you for listening to the 6th episode of Bodied, the Cloud9 Fancast. Feel free to tweet questions and feedback to @C9Bodied or email us at bodiedfancast@gmail.com. Questions might be answered on the next podcast. Seriously, please send in questions. We're kind of lonely. Anyway, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Say goodbye, Headwires.
Peace out.
Goodbye.